welcome to this week's episode of Krime KE podcast. My good name is Ajuma and I am a human rights journalist from Kenya. Now, this week's episode is quite different from what I usually do, as you can see in the title of the episode. But I have wanted to talk about this since the report came out last month, and I realized that if I keep postponing it, it won't happen. So here we are. Now, if you have listened to the last season I covered on the podcast on femicide, then you know that this is an issue that really matters to me, and it is something that I'm very, very passionate about. So today, I want to really go through this femicide report, which was released on 12th of February this year by OdipoDev, Africa Uncensored, and Africa Data Hub. The report is called Counting the Cost, a decade of femicide in Kenya, and it analyzes the state of femicide in Kenya from 2016 to 2025. Now, you have probably seen news articles on this report because I think the report is publicly available. But if you want a copy, you can reach out through our social media platforms and I would be glad to share it with you. First of all, I like how comprehensive the report was in breaking down the trends of femicide and how it has evolved over the years. Now, I didn't like the results of how femicide has evolved, but I liked how comprehensive the reports covered the whole thing. They used court records and media reports to map out the cases of femicide in the country, and it was determined that within that period of 10 years, 1,065 femicide cases were reported. 102 of those cases were reported last year in 2025. Now, and I just want to highlight that these are the cases that have been reported. There are a lot of cases that go unreported. And this is for different reasons, but mainly because of what has been described as a culture of silence. I mean, like, how many times even in our communities, do we hear people being told to solve their issues quietly, being told, hiyo ni mambo ya nyumbani? And I love how this report even highlights around 10 femicide cases from different counties in Kenya that were not reported, just to show that the number could be higher if the country had better systems in place. Now, let's talk about the victims of femicide and the perpetrators. According to this report, 65% of femicide victims are aged between 18 and 25. These are girls and women in their early to mid-20s, late teens, early to mid-20s, essentially targeted and murdered. Do you know what this means? This means that young girls are being murdered. I turned 25 3 months ago, so I know how important it is to live this period of your life. This period of your life is very important because you have dreams, you are graduating, you're getting into relationships, and even achieving some very important life milestones. So, seeing that a lot of Kenyan girls my age are being murdered by people they trust at this very crucial point in their lives is very heartbreaking, and it is something that should be taken very seriously. And talking of people whom they trust, the report found that the highest number of perpetrators of femicide are intimate partners, husbands, boyfriends, exes. Even like in the case of Sylvia Kemunto, the girl who was murdered in uni. Her story I covered on this podcast. She was allegedly murdered by someone who was making advances towards her. It seems like a relationship is the most unsafe place for a woman to be. And even leaving the relationship is not a guarantee for safety for women. And apart from intimate partners, the highest number of perpetrators is the victim's family members. So the report even goes ahead and says that, according to their findings, marriage does not shield women from harm, but it places them directly in its path, which is factual because husbands are the highest number of perpetrators of femicide. In 2025 alone, 61% of femicides were committed in the homes of the victims, the one place where people are supposed to be safe. Many of the women whose stories we have talked about were killed at home. Rebecca Cheptegei, Sheila Lumumba, Naomi Chebet, Agnes Tirop, Rose Soila. The list is very long, and each of these women experienced harm in their own homes. The next higher number of femicides in 2025 also occurred in public spaces. Apart from the home, the next most unsafe place for women is public spaces. 21% of the victims were murdered in public spaces. This is a place where you are always told as a woman, if you want to meet someone, meet them in a public space. But apparently, you are not safe even in a public space either. And this also shows how bold perpetrators have gotten, that they can just kill women even in public. I mean, look at the case of Ivy Wangeshi. She was literally hacked to death in broad daylight at 11 a.m. in the morning. Finally, the other thing I want to talk about is justice in femicide cases and how technology has been used to facilitate femicide. Now, according to the report, it takes an average of 4 to 6 years for a femicide case to go from charging to sentencing. And during this long process, the victims' families bear the many costs related to getting justice, transport costs, medical bills, even paying for evidence forms, leaving many of them financially drained by the time the case concludes. And out of all the femicide cases reported from 2016 to 2024, only less than 10% have reached judgment through the justice system. Less than 10%. Now, even though their court processes are very slow, most cases that do reach a verdict result in convictions with an average sentence of 16 years. 16 years, this is tragically the value placed on the life of a Kenyan woman who has been murdered. The highest prison sentence for femicide came in 2018 when a perpetrator was sentenced to 26.9 years. Now, even though husbands are the most common perpetrators of femicide, they often receive the lightest sentences. Do we see how the systems are really set up to fail women in one way or the other? This is usually because husbands enter plea bargains, or the courts are forced to take, not really forced, but the courts take into account that there are children left behind, so they tend to get the lowest of the sentences. Now, I also want to talk about the cultural weaknesses in the Kenyan society that allow perpetrators to evade justice. Now, apart from the silence and being told to solve problems in the house, there is also this culture of victim blaming among Kenyans. I mean, how many times have we seen people on social media saying, oh, if the victim hadn't gone to an Airbnb, if they had just left that relationship, if they did not love money, if they had done this, if they had done that, they wouldn't be dead. I mean, that is so outrageous. And I think there is also a comment that was left on the Ivy Wangeshi episode. I think it was a very, I think it's still up. On the Ivy Wangeshi episode of this podcast, someone left a very victim-blamey comment. And I don't think that it is fair to the victims to blame them for their death, because, I mean, they lost their lives. They are dead. And we are here trying to shift the conversation from the murder and justice and placing the responsibility on them. Even though they cannot speak for themselves, they are not here. They are the ones who suffered from the femicide. I love that the report also went into how technology facilitated gender-based violence, which is commonly known as TFGBV, has promoted and changed the way in which femicide is perpetrated in a very sinister way, like using things like sextortion to get their victims. I mean, Starlet Wahu and Rita Waini are very good examples of how technology was used to perpetrate femicide. Both of their stories have been featured in this podcast, and you can always go back to listen. Technology has made it seemingly very easy for women to be targeted and murdered, and even for the suspects to get away with femicide. Now, Rita Waini's case is a very good example of this because she communicated with her alleged murderer on Instagram, and up until today, her case has not been solved for so many reasons, including the fact that the suspect was able to erase his account from social media after her murder. Let's not even get started on artificial intelligence and how it has been used to harass and silence women. Now, according to the findings of this report, femicide in Kenya is not a failure of awareness, but it's a failure of action, which I couldn't agree with more. Now, I would like to conclude this by adding my voice to those calling for femicide to be declared a national crisis in Kenya, because this is a very urgent problem and it should be treated as such. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this episode. You can support Krime KE podcast by sharing this episode with your friends so that we can get a larger community to listen to the crime cases. On TikTok and Instagram, we are at krime.ke. On Facebook, you can find me at Ajuma Millicent. I have tagged the podcast contact information and social media pages on the show notes of this episode so that it is easier for you to reach out if you have any feedback on this episode or the podcast in general. We also have a WhatsApp number, which I have put in the show notes of this episode. You can send in your voice messages, suggest cases, and even give feedback on the podcast. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and catch the next episode of Krime KE podcast on Thursday next week on the same platform you're listening from right now. But until then, stay safe and remember, it is crime with a K.